Robert Spencer received a BA in 1983 and an MA in 1986 in religious studies from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He has been studying Islamic theology, law, and history for over 30 years. Here now is a bonus segment from a presentation he gave in 2011.
There were Jews in Arabia. There were three powerful Jewish tribes in Medina where Muhammad lived for the last half of his career as a prophet, the last 10 years. And there were various Christian groups in Arabia that he had dealings with also, to a lesser degree. And so he went to them and he said, here is the new prophetic message from the one true God, and I am the new prophet. And the Jews said, you're a prophet in the line of the biblical prophets, and you're not even Jewish? Sorry. And the Christians said, Jesus said on the cross, it is finished, and we're not waiting for a new prophet, but thanks for coming anyway. And what would you do if you were Muhammad in that instant? What would you do? He had two choices. He could say, oh, well, this is embarrassing. Never mind. I guess I'm not a prophet after all. And this is not a book from God. Because it did not, in other words, confirm, in reality, the teachings of the scriptures that the Jews and Christians had in their possession. Or, what else? He only had two choices. He could say that, which was obviously inconceivable, or he could say, so it's even worse than I thought. You have dared to tamper with your own scriptures. You have dared to take the messages that your prophets delivered to you from the one true God, and you have altered their contents and even their words, altered their meaning, altered their interpretation, in other words, and their wording, to erase references to my coming. Those are your only two choices. And so it is part of Islamic tradition, standard, mainstream Islamic teaching, that Judaism and Christianity, as we know them today, all of them are astray from the true teachings of Moses and Jesus. And so it's not coincidental. I was reading to you from chapter 3. You can open your Qurans to chapter 3, verse 67. And we have a bit about Abraham. In the Quran, actually, what it says is this: people of the book, that's us, why do you dispute with us about Abraham, even though the Torah and the gospel were not revealed until after his time? Do you not understand? It says Abraham was neither a Jew nor Christian, he was a Muslim. How could Abraham be a Muslim when Muhammad died in the year 632, several thousand years after Abraham? And he originated this thing when in the year 610, he went up on the mountain into the cave and was praying and received the first visitation from Gabriel. And suddenly, a man who lived a couple thousand years before that is supposed to have held to the same faith? Because, you see, the original faith of all the prophets was Islam. Because Islam is the true faith from the true God. And so Abraham, you see, was a Muslim, as the Quran tells us. Moses was a Muslim. Jesus was a Muslim. And then what happened? Then their followers, out of a desire for selfish gain, out of a desire to get rich, out of a desire for whatever other creaturely comforts, they dared to tamper with their own scriptures, with the Torah and the gospel, to create what we know of today as Judaism and Christianity. And then the Quran was delivered sometime later in order to correct the record and to restore the true teachings of Moses and Jesus. And there's evidence of this tampering all over. You look, for example, at the Gospel of John in the New Testament. I'm talking about the real one now. And in there you will see that Jesus says, there are many things that I have to tell you, but you cannot bear to hear them now. And the Holy Spirit, the Paraclete, will come and he will guide you into all the truth. Now, Paraclete, as it happens, is very close to another Greek word, parakletos, that means the praised one, which is what Muhammad means. And so in Surah 61 of the Quran, you have Jesus saying this. Call to mind when Jesus, son of Mary, said, O children of Israel, I am Allah's messenger to you. I verify the Torah which has come before me, and I give you the glad tidings of a messenger who shall come after me, his name being Ahmed. Ahmed meaning the praised one, a cognate of Muhammad. And you see, they tampered with it to create all this Holy Spirit business. Really, Jesus was saying Muhammad is going to come. Now, why would they do that? Why would the Christians have altered the teachings of their Islamic prophet in order to create this new and false religion? There's a story in Islamic tradition, in the Hadith, which are the records of Muhammad's words and deeds, normative for Muslim behavior, because Muhammad is called in the Quran, chapter 33, verse 21, the excellent example of conduct. And Muslims take that very seriously. Muhammad is the excellent example of conduct in every way. If Muhammad did it, it's right. If he did it, it's exemplary. And so, for example, you have the fact that embarrasses many Islamic spokesmen in the West today, that when Muhammad was 51, he contracted a marriage with a 6-year-old girl and consummated it when he was 54 and she was 9. But because he's the excellent example of conduct, that's perfectly right. So the Ayatollah Khomeini, when he became the leader and when we created the Islamic Republic of Iran in 1979, one of the first things that he did after the relatively secular rule of the Shah was to lower the legal marriageable age of girls to 9. Because the Prophet did it, it must be right. The aid workers went into Afghanistan after the Taliban was toppled the first time in 2003, and they went into refugee camps, and they found that half the girls of second grade age were already married, and virtually all of the girls older than that were already married. And this was because Muhammad did it. It's right. Now, Muhammad, as the excellent example of conduct, this creates a very peculiar situation for morals, but there's more to it than that as well. That when you have the Jews and the Christians teaching these false religions, how he behaved toward them also becomes normative. Now, I was asking the question, why would we tamper with our scriptures as Christians? There is a story in the Hadith of a delegation of Christians from southern Arabia, from Najran, which is around Yemen. And there was a large Christian community there at that time, going to see Muhammad. And on the way to Medina, the leader of this Christian group says to his followers, we know this man is a prophet. We know that he fulfills the prophecies that are in our scriptures. But when we get there, we must contradict him at every turn and not accept anything he says, because the Byzantines, the Eastern Roman Empire, they give us money. They give us a steady stipend. And if we acknowledge that this man's a prophet, they'll cut us off. So in other words, out of a desire for filthy lucre, they refuse to acknowledge Muhammad as a prophet. And you will still find to this day there's no concept in Islamic theology at all of people rejecting the religion of Islam in good faith. There's no idea of that. We all know better. The truth of it shines forth. So, what does all this have to do with dialogue? Obviously, if we are dealing with Muslims who are informed about their faith, knowledgeable about it, and sincerely believing in it, we are dealing with people who believe us to be morally compromised renegades from the true faith. And there's more. The idea of Islamic law is to establish itself all over the world because it's the perfect model for the perfect society, derived from the perfect book, given to the prophet in perfect form from the one true God who had it with him forever in paradise. And so there is no model of society that is superior to Islamic law, and it's the mandate of the Muslims to fight in various ways, not necessarily by hot warfare, to establish that law all over the world. And so, will Muslim groups and Muslim individuals enter into dialogue with Christians? Of course. Do they do that Will they enter into cooperative ventures? Obviously. We saw that at the UN when it was Muslim groups allying, Muslim countries allying with the Vatican to defeat anti-life initiatives. But at the same time, they understand not that they are dealing with equals, not that they are dealing with partners, not that there is going to be a genuine interchange of ideas and an attempt to reach a mutual understanding. But all of this is just a vehicle either to expand the hegemony of Islamic law or to make the Christians believe that there really isn't anything to be concerned about and that they don't need to be worried about jihad or about Sharia or about Islam spreading in the West, because it's really not anything to contradict any of our basic freedoms or the model of society that we enjoy in the West with the freedom of speech and the freedom of conscience and so on. It's no problem. And that is also because Muhammad also said war is deceit. And Surah 328 of the Quran says, do not take unbelievers as your friends and protectors in preference to believers. And anybody who does this has nothing to do with Allah, unless you're doing it to guard yourselves against them. Now, unless you're doing it to guard yourselves against them, let's see what they say that means. The Quran that I have here today is a very excellent addition towards understanding the Quran, with a commentary by a very prominent Islamic scholar, Sayyid Abdullah Maududi. Maududi was a Pakistani. He died in 1979, and his writings are influential internationally. If you go to your local Islamic bookstore, you'll find Maududi's writings. If you go to IslamicBookstore.com or Islamicity.com, you will find Maududi's writings. And this Quran explains that verse. Maududi's commentary on that verse that I was referring to, Surah 3, verse 28. Do not take unbelievers as your friends and protectors in preference to believers, unless you're doing it to guard yourselves against them. This is how he explains that. This means that it is lawful for a believer, helpless in the grip of the enemies of Islam, and in imminent danger of severe wrong and persecution, to keep his faith concealed, and to behave in such manner as to create the impression that he is on the same side as his enemies. He is, in other words, it is lawful, it is divinely mandated, as far as Muslims are concerned, to, under certain circumstances, create the impression that they are on the same side as their enemies. Now, does this mean that every Muslim who reaches out to you in friendship, or every Muslim group that reaches out to a church or to a Christian group in dialogue is trying to deceive you? No, certainly not. But it does mean that it does happen, and that we need to keep a steady and sober regard for the possibility that it could happen. And this is the great hazard of dialogue with Muslim groups in the United States, that we have people who don't know anything about Islam. They go to these churches and they tell people Islam is a religion of peace and Sharia is just a private moral code. Islamic law is just a private moral code, like Catholic marriage law or Jewish law, and it's nothing to be concerned about. It's not incompatible with Western society or values. And people buy it. Why wouldn't they? And the hazard about that is that it leaves them susceptible to threats that they don't understand are coming, and leaves them essentially naive and complacent in the face of people who do not have their best interests at heart. And so, while I think that there is no reason not to talk to Muslim groups, it's very important to be informed, to be aware, to keep your eyes open, and to understand how Islam views Christianity. And if you keep in mind the things that I have touched on very briefly about how the Quran views Christians as being the followers of a heretical version of the true teaching of Jesus, well then, it can change your perspective on an awful lot of things. Now, ultimately, human nature is everywhere the same, and people are people everywhere. And there's a spectrum of belief and knowledge and fervor among Muslims, just as there is among Catholics and among every other religious group. There are people who know all about it and are very serious about it. There are people who know all about it and don't try to put it into practice in their lives at all. There are people who don't know anything about it and don't care. But if you ask them, they'll say, yes, I'm a Catholic, or yes, I'm a Muslim. And so Also, it is important to understand where the person you are dealing with is coming from. There is a television show that's just about to start called All American Muslim, getting a lot of publicity. Just as the fact that studies show that most Catholics contracept doesn't change the teachings of the Church against contraception. The teachings of the Church are what they are, even if nobody pays attention to them. And the teachings of Islam are what they are, based on the Quran, based on the Sunnah, which is derived from the example of Muhammad in the Hadith. And the schools of Islamic jurisprudence are unanimous in teaching that it is part of the responsibility of Muslims to wage war against unbelievers and to subjugate them under the rule of Islamic law. So ultimately, this is, in a very real sense, as the phrase has it, a clash of civilizations. This is a struggle between radically different visions of what is the good and perfect society, or even just the best society we can manage on this earth, given the realities of human nature and of sin. And in this, however we may deal with individual Muslims, whether we are dealing with our friends or in dialogue in some formalized setting, we have to remember that we have in Catholic civilization, in Judeo-Christian civilization, a vision of life, a model of society that has been the foundation for the greatest civilization on earth and has given the whole world notions of human rights and of the basic dignity of the human person that are universally accepted, quite even far beyond the confines of the Church and of Christendom, and that are radically different from these ideas of warfare, subjugation, the denial of the freedom of conscience. Muhammad said, if anybody changes his religion, leaves Islam, kill him, and so on. And so ultimately, if we stand up for who we are and proclaim it without hesitation and without fear, come what may, then there is no doubt whatsoever that the truth will be triumphant. But if we trim and dissemble out of fear, as so many public officials are doing today, or out of the desire for gain that Islamic theology imputes to us, then there's no doubt that this vision of society, of the subjugation of the unbelievers, and a radical transformation of Western free societies, it would be inevitable. And so that is the challenge before us today and certainly in the coming decades. Thanks very much.
We hope you've enjoyed this bonus segment from Robert Spencer. If this presentation has helped you in your faith journey, and you would like to hear more of these inspiring talks, we invite you to visit our website and enroll yourself or a friend in our CD of the Month Club. As a listener, your input is very important in helping us improve this program to reach many more souls for Christ and His Church. We would like to send you a free gift for your time when you complete a very brief survey on the presentation you just heard. You will find the survey at our website, lighthousecatholicmedia.org. Thank you for listening, and may God richly bless you and your family.